My name is John Miller. Appreciate you making your way here. And today I want to share my testimony. The reason why, well, there's no other reason why other than I just want to exclaim to the mountaintops what God has done for me in my life as it relates to helping me overcome a significant alcohol problem that I had in my younger years. And as we prepare to relaunch Celebrate Recovery, Discovery Bible Fellowship for both men and women's groups, we'll talk more about that here in a bit, thought it might be a good idea to share my story. Someone that goes to church with you, someone who's a lot like you, just a guy with a family in Oklahoma, trying to make ends meet and work every day and be the best person I can be. Nobody special. That's for sure. The special part of this story, as you will hear it unfold, is God's intervention in my life and what we can do, or rather what He can do through us when we submit to Him and allow Him to be the power and the bedrock behind all of our decisions and actions. Like any problem, I didn't get into mine overnight. I abused alcohol for between the ages of 17 to 35. Started out as a binge drinker late high school years, and then into college that certainly continued and accelerated at a greater rate. Made a lot of very dumb decisions along the way while under the influence of alcohol. Had a DUI at the age of 19. That didn't slow me down, even though I got in some pretty significant trouble from my parents for that. Did not slow me down because I was still trying to be the one and only in charge of my one and only life, which we all know, hopefully. Many of you know, and if you don't, let me just tell you, it's not a good idea. That behavior began to escalate, and then in my mid-20s, still living a very self-centered, destructive lifestyle, making so many poor decisions I would never make were I not under the influence of alcohol. That is not the type of person I even like to remember. Sometimes remembering myself back in those days is a hard process, but I've forgiven myself. God's forgiven me. And the only things that God doesn't forgive us of are the things that we remember and don't let go and don't forgive ourselves of. And God frees us from those things when we do submit and turn those over to Him. Turns those thorns in our sides into reasons to look to Him and to give Him all of the praise. I was 27 years old in 1998, and I met someone who would turn out to be my wife, Andrea Miller. Many of you know her. And early on in our process of dating, which only lasted about 7 months before we got married, she witnessed my drinking, my excessive drinking. Sometimes blacking out, not remembering what I had done, but it didn't slow me down because I had convinced myself that alcohol, or drinking rather, was, maybe I didn't put the word important on it at that particular point in time, but I convinced myself that, hey, this is what I do for fun. I love going to the bars and hanging out with my friends. This is what I do for fun. When I go golf, I love to have a few beers. When I play poker, I love to have a few beers. When I do this, I love to have a few beers. When I do that, I love to have a few beers. Commonality in all that is I love to have a few beers, and a few is just a, code word for a lot. Those behaviors, those activities, in some instances, those relationships were all enabling devices that allowed me to feed the alcoholic beast that was within me, that I really didn't name or identify until much later in my life, and nearly at the cost of everything that I hold near and dear. So my problems began to escalate. I began to hide my alcohol consumption from my wife. And then in 2002, we had a baby, Grace Miller. Some of you know her as well. And I vividly recall being with her on Sundays or Saturdays after having gone out Fridays and Saturday nights. And Andrea, going off to run errands or having some time to herself, as it's a good idea to have when you have young children. Everybody gets a little bit of time away. Just laying around and putting in video after video so that Grace could watch that, so I could basically recover from my hangover while laying on the couch and not having to do anything. It's not being a very good father. for one, and risking your livelihood, your reputation, your life, the life of others. It's not being a very good father either. It's not being a very good citizen. It's not being a very good son, both to our earthly and heavenly fathers and mother. So that continued. That escalated. I recall the final year in advance of my sobriety date, praying nearly every night, God, please help me to cut back on my drinking. I never prayed for God to help me to stop drinking entirely because, as I told you just a few minutes ago, I had this lie in my head that life would be so boring if I couldn't do all of these activities. And when I did all of those activities or those relationships or what have you, drinking was involved. Probably some subconscious fear also involved in that. What am I going to do without alcohol? I'm going to just be a boring old guy. I mean, what is there to life if I can't go out and see my friends, or can't go to the bar and hang out and talk with them, or can't go play poker with my friends, this, that, and the other. All these things that I placed value on that are really very empty and hollow. Now, I'm not saying that having friends and getting together with friends isn't a good thing. And certainly at Discovery, this is a church that really makes it a point to encourage you and everyone involved in the church to get involved in small groups, to get to know people on a deep relational level, as that is absolutely biblical. That is the church. And we help one another through hard times. We're better together, as I've heard numerous pastors in my life say. And I believe that. It is good to have those types of relationships. So that year prior to my sobriety date, praying, God, please help me to cut back on my drinking. Please help me to cut back on my drinking, because I could begin to tell I had a problem, but I wasn't strong enough to overcome it. And I still hadn't reached my own personal low point to where I was ready to surrender. That low point came on September 30th of 2006. I won't go into numbers or the details, but I drank a lot that night. I had planned for weeks to take a cab home because I knew I was going to be going out that night, as some family was coming in and friends, and it was a big football game. I was going to go to the bar and watch that, as I didn't have obligations at that point in time that kept me from doing that I normally did in my previous career in broadcasting. So I was planning on tying one on that night, but I was also planning on being responsible and taking the cab home. Well, as the night went on, as I consumed more and more alcohol, got free drinks because of my position at that time, I mean, it was a lot. I also always had this sense in my head when I knew I was about 20 to 30 minutes away from making an embarrassment of myself, where I was going to begin to really lose control of my speech. Some type of drunken self-awareness alarm would go off in my head that would say, you need to get out of here. And I did. And I didn't call the cab. I drove home. Thankfully, I didn't hit or hurt anyone. I made it home. I actually remember the drive home. I remember walking into the house, and I remember as I walked into the house grabbing one more beer out of the refrigerator down in the garage, that refrigerator that I would oftentimes restock. Unbeknownst to my wife, I would buy a 12-pack on the way home from my day job, hide it in the bushes when I got home, and then later on that evening go and put it in the refrigerator and consume it that night and act so giddy and excited when I had that opportunity. And I'd stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning, and I would say, oh, I just work late, you know, and I did, but it was a companion. Some of you who are struggling right now may relate to that. It was a partner in crime. It was there with me. It had control of me, which I didn't realize at that particular point in time. And I also remember during that time saying, God, please, I'm not going to drink tonight. And then invariably I'd find myself in my driveway after I'd gotten home, having pulled off at a convenience store and buying beer when I didn't even intend to, and sometimes didn't remember even doing it. Not that I was drunk at that time. I was not a wake up in the morning drinker. I was only at evening and night and hiding it. I was a very functional alcoholic. And thankfully, we'll get to that other stuff in a minute. So I grabbed that one more beer that night on September 30th, 2016. I remember walking up the stairs. I don't remember anything after that. So what I'm about to tell you comes from my wife's retelling of this, and I have zero reason to believe that it's untrue. I'd gone into our bedroom that night, something I normally didn't do. Whenever I had gone out to the bars, my wife, and certainly understandable, she did not want me to sleep in our bed together because I would smell like smoke. And so I would sleep in the guest room. But this night, I think God led me into our bedroom. I laid on the bed across her feet. So if she's straight up and down, I laid this way across her feet. So that was odd. Anyway, conversation we had, she knew that I was very intoxicated. And she'd had her last straw with that. She'd hit a point. She'd hit her breaking point. The next day, I recall hearing the garage door open up in the morning, and I looked out the window, and my wife and daughter, Grace, at that point in time was 3 years old, were going off, and I assumed to church, and I was surprised she didn't wake me up. Because also during these times, I was helping to co-lead a small group. Jump back to 2003, 3 years prior to this, we were leading a small group in Kansas City at the church we were attending then. Came home one night, or several nights actually. Wife would fall asleep, newborn baby upstairs asleep. Grace at that time was a newborn. I would go out to the driveway. I would put the key in the ignition but not turn it on. I would get it to where I could put the car in neutral. And we had an ever so slight downhill grade on our driveway. And I would push one leg down and push back and start to get it rolling to where I could roll it out into the street. And I would coast down the hill about 100 yards back into a driveway because I was going backwards now down this hill that we lived on. Turn it around, start the car, drive down to the convenience store to get alcohol. It's a lot of scheming and planning to do these things because alcohol was in control of my life. It's almost embarrassing to retell these things, and there are many details that I've forgotten that maybe I should have written down or maybe too ashamed to write down to want to remember, but that one just came to my mind. So Andrea had gone to church on October 1st of 2006 without me. And she was very upset. She was furious. She was heartbroken. She had decided that she was going to leave me at that point in time. She was going to drive back to Kansas City. We were living in Des Moines, Iowa at this time. Drive back to Kansas City, and she was going to take Grace with her, and we were going to have a divorce. So we were going to have a broken home. And that was the decision that she'd made. But God began to really shine through. He was there all along, but he really shone through and made himself evident and known at this particular instance. Andrea went to pick up Grace, who was again 3, from kids' church that day. When Grace met Andrea, she handed her something that she'd colored that day, as oftentimes happen when you have children that age. And what she handed Andrea was this. I'm not sure if we can see it here. You can. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. This is the exact thing that my daughter colored on October 1st, 2006. And the thing that began to break through the anger, the hurt, the heartbreak, the hardening of heart that my wife was experiencing that morning when she decided to leave me. Obviously, we saved that. Someone asked me one time, if you saw that your house was on fire and your family was safe and your pets were safe, what's the one thing you would run into your house to save if you could only save one thing? And my answer is easy. It's that piece of paper. It's priceless to me. It's a constant reminder, and it's always over my shoulder here at my home office, of what God can do, how he can break through. Because Andrea's heart was hard, and for good reason, and I don't blame her. She came home from church that day and confronted me. And all that morning, as you might expect, I was expecting a confrontation. I was expecting a big blow-up or worse. And she shared with me at that point in time that she wanted to leave me, that it's a shame that our daughter was going to grow up in a broken home. She wasn't yet prepared to tell me that God was softening her heart because she needed to get some things out, and I don't blame her. And she left. And I hit my knees downstairs in the home we were living in at that time, in the laundry room, which is where we had this conversation, probably because it was as far away from Grace's earshot as possible. I remember hitting my knees on that day, October 1st, 2006, crying, broken, pleading with God, God, please take this cup from my mouth because I'm not strong enough to do it. I can't do this. You're going to have to do it for me. You're going to have to carry me. And that was October 1st, 2006. I record this today on October 5th, 2018. I've not had one drink of alcohol since. I'm nothing special. I'm not strong. I'm weak. I'm no different than any of you, no better, no worse. For whatever reason, God chose to take that cup from my mouth. And in my experience of knowing hundreds of individuals in my life afterwards, sharing this testimony, I shared this testimony at our church in Iowa in front of thousands of people. I shared it on my radio show in 2007 or 2008. So many of you have had a harder road in sobriety than I've had. Some of you have a physical dependency to it, not just the mental dependency like I had. And it's hard. It's hard. But that doesn't mean there's no hope, because there is. The real key, in my experience, is surrender. Surrender it to God. Admit your weakness. Admit that you are powerless over it, and that there's only one power that can help you overcome it. And that's God. It worked for me. It's worked for hundreds of people that I know. And I know that it can work for you. I also know scores of people for whom have had a much harder road, who've had starts and restarts, who have had relapses, you might say, but they still keep fighting. It doesn't make them any less faithful. It doesn't make them any better or worse than me or others who haven't relapsed. It makes me love them more because they keep coming back and they keep trying because they want to change. And I won't sit here and say it's not because they haven't done enough or they haven't tried hard enough. I don't know the answers to why. I just know what God has done for me. And I know that what I had to do, submit, to get to that point where He could work with me. So in the hours, in the evening, at night that followed that first day, that first week, 2 weeks after I quit drinking, my wife and daughter left town for the weekend, I did not drink. I ate the heck out of Icy Pops. Those things that are liquid that you put in the freezer that you cut off and you can suck. I ate those like I was drinking 12 packs of beer. I think I had carbohydrate withdrawal. Thankfully, not alcohol withdrawal. But that's a much better trade-off. My wife that Christmas bought me a guitar. And in the hours that I used to hide and sneak alcohol into the house and drink, I taught myself to play. I became a less than average guitar player. And I wrote a number of songs. You'll never hear them on the radio. You may hear one at the end of this piece. That were all praise songs to God for what He'd done for me. And I had so much fun doing it. And I would send them off to my pastor at the time. He's still one of my best friends. And helped me walk through this as well. Walked alongside me, as did so many other people. Because again, we're better together. You can't do these things alone. And then 3 years later, in 2009, he reached out to me and said, John, I want you to lead the worship band for a group that we're going to start here at our church. It's called Celebrate Recovery. And I laughed and I said, Mike, the last time I've sang in front of people was when I was Willy Wonka in like 5th or 6th grade or something like that. I don't know about that. He's like, I think you should consider it. And as a way that pastors can say that to you. Long story short, I agreed to do it. My fellow bandmates all people in recovery, all having time of sobriety, all having challenges, whether it was drugs or alcohol or abuse or any number of hurts, habits, or hang-ups. We were quite a motley crew, but boy, did we have fun. It was such a great community. We enjoyed our time together. And remember those times I told you about earlier? That I was fearful that my life would be boring, that I wouldn't be able to have fun without alcohol, and all of these things I did involved alcohol. Guess what I don't do anymore? Not because I think there's anything wrong with it. I don't play cards anymore. I think it's boring sitting there for 2 or 3 hours. The only reason I probably even enjoyed it was because it enabled my drinking. I don't really go to bars anymore. Not because I think there's anything wrong with that. I'm certainly not coming at this from a judgment standpoint. Sometimes I can and do go there with friends and watch a game if I see some friends from back home. I mean, I can be around it and not be tempted by it. Some people can't. You'll have to know that for yourself. I just find those things to be boring. God has filled my life with so many other things that I enjoy doing so much more. And maybe it's because I'm pushing 50. And I like to mow my yard in straight lines. I get some deep satisfaction from that. I'm learning how to repair my car, and spending a little more time golfing is what's on the agenda for next year. Who knows what it is? But I know I don't miss any of those activities. I'll still text with some of those people that I used to hang out with and drink with a lot. But, we moved away from Iowa. We came to Oklahoma in 2013. And that move has been a great thing for us as well. But back to the Celebrate Recovery program. So I was leading that for a year. One of the things I did leave out a minute ago was that first night of sobriety, October 1st, 2006. I knew that I needed to show my wife something more than just, I'll really quit this time, because she'd heard that before. So I went to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that night. And I was mortified. I was afraid that someone's going to recognize me. The church that we attended in Iowa is the largest Lutheran church in the world. So you can kind of blend in. But I had a radio show, a TV show in the Des Moines area. So I was, a C-level celebrity, you might say. So I was kind of, my ego was kind of concerned that someone's going to recognize me and say, oh, John Miller's in here. What's his problem? What I didn't realize is when you go to a 12-step program or you go to a program like Celebrate Recovery, there's no judgment in the joint. It is acceptance, understanding, compassion, and people really want to help you overcome what it is that you're struggling with. Sincerely, even if they've only met you for the first time that first visit, they really want to help you get to where they are. And as we went around that room and I heard, my name's Jim, I've been sober for 12 years. My name's Joe, I've been sober for 1 year. My name's Jane, I've been sober for 1 month. My name's Tom, I was sober for 15 years. I had a relapse, but now I've got 3 more years back in. My name's Steve, and I relapsed last week. All these stories that I kept hearing were so powerful to me, empowering as well. Amazing testimonies that I heard. And I'm the kind of person that when things are bad or I'm in a tough valley of life, I like to reach out to people that I know who've walked through those valleys and came out the other side. And they're either at a mountaintop or they're halfway up the mountain. We're all going to have those peaks and valleys all throughout our life. I know there are valleys ahead of me. I don't know what those might be, but I know they'll come. And I know that we can manage those storms if we have the right type of shelter. And that's in the embrace of our Heavenly Father and His amazing and unbounding mercy and grace. So the 12-step program was good, and then the Celebrate Recovery program began, and I really gravitated towards that because AA talks about higher power. I made sure that when it was my turn to talk, I'd say Jesus. But the Celebrate Recovery step study book, great tool, great resource, great source of strength. It's an aid to help you along your way. So it's one of the reasons, to kind of close up here, that I'm really excited to help lead Celebrate Recovery at Discovery Bible Fellowship. And you don't have to be a member of Discovery Bible Fellowship to come to our meetings. There'll be meetings for men only and for women only. So if you're a woman hearing this and you'd feel uncomfortable talking about your hurt habit or hang up in front of men, you're going to have your own group led by great people who've also struggled, who've also come through it, who have absolutely amazing testimonies, some of which I can direct you to. And if you're a man, you'll have me and some other great men willing to give their time and share their testimonies and be there to help guide you along the way, but mostly, most importantly, point you to the source of true relief, true freedom, and that is God. This program can help do that for you. And like I said earlier, it doesn't matter if it doesn't stick the first time you try. Not everyone can be miraculously healed the way that I was. No, everyone can be. Not everyone walks that road. I tell people I'm a former alcoholic. It makes some people who are alcoholics, makes them bristle. Well, John, you're never a former alcoholic. Listen, I get that if I went out and cracked open a beer right now, I would be back sucked in to a horrific lifestyle where I would be drinking every night. I know that while I've been sober as I record this for 12 years, my demons, my problem, my addiction has just been doing push-ups in the background, waiting for his chance, waiting for his chance. But he's in a cage. I'm not going to let him out because I appreciate and recognize the grace that I've been afforded. So I realize that everyone's struggles are different. Every challenge is different. People will meet them in different ways. There needs to be a commonality, though, of surrender. Surrender it to God. Get yourself to the point where you realize you have a problem and that you want out. And be open enough to talk about that with others. And that's why I think Celebrate Recovery is a great opportunity, because I know a church of our size, there are hundreds of people, hundreds, who are dealing with some type of addiction, whether it's drug or alcohol, whether it's pornography, you name it, or have had big time issues in their life, been victims of physical, sexual, verbal abuse. That's still causing some problems in their life. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Whatever it is, whatever your hurt habit or hang up is, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You have a lot to be hopeful for. And hopefully, the Celebrate Recovery program can be a first step for you. Do not be ashamed. Do not be embarrassed. I'm just a normal guy, the same way that you were. I used to be a drunk, but I am that no longer, thanks to God. And He can do that for you as well. I want to read one thing here for you before I go. It's called the Serenity Prayer. Some of you may have heard it, or you've heard it and you didn't know what it was called. God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. Or in another way to put it, God, grant me the serenity to change the things I can change and the courage to do it, and understand those that I can't change, I need you for. Continuing, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace. I love that line. Taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, but trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you in the next. And as a below average guitar player, I put that into music and did my own little thing, and as a praise to Him. So I really hope to see you at Celebrate Recovery. If not this year, then someday down the road. And if you see me at church and you're not comfortable going to a meeting just yet, and you'd like to maybe get together one-on-one and talk about this, talk about entry points, talk about your concerns, I'd be glad to do it. Just come up to me and we can arrange a time. I'm blessed to be able to work out of the house now, set my own schedule in that regard. So I'm flexible and live in Owasso and can make time to meet you and help you where you are in your life and with your challenges. Thank you so much for spending this much time, and hope to see you soon.
I said, God, now grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot see and the strength for what I can. Give me the wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time to see the beauty of your plan. Now hardship is a path to peace, even in this sinful world, though it's not as you would have it. I trust you to make things right, and I surrender to your will. I will find joy in this life, in contentment in the next one, for always and forever. Now you've been and ever shall be, in Jesus' name we pray, amen. I said, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot see and the strength for what I can.